The crisp dawn breeze drifted through the quiet streets of Oak Ridge, a peaceful suburban town just waking up to the day. Jordan Ellis jogged along the pavement, his steady breath syncing with the rhythm of his feet hitting the ground. At 42, he was in excellent shape, disciplined in both body and mind. His black hoodie shielded him from the early morning chill, and his short, well-kept locks bounced slightly as he moved. This was his time, his daily escape from the chaos of work and responsibility. What Jordan didn't realize was that someone was watching him. A few blocks away, Officer Mark Reynolds sat in his patrol car, fingers tapping idly against the steering wheel. He wasn't responding to a call. He wasn't patrolling for trouble. He was simply observing. His sharp eyes tracked Jordan's movements, suspicion flickering in them. A black man jogging alone in this neighborhood, dressed like that? His gut told him something wasn't right. Mark's hand tightened around the steering wheel as he slowly pulled onto the road, following behind. Jordan remained lost in his thoughts, the steady pounding of his feet drowning out everything else. But then something fell off. His senses prickled. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted the unmistakable shape of a police cruiser trailing him. Not passing, not turning, just following. His chest tensed. He wasn't doing anything wrong, yet he knew how these situations often played out. A jog mistaken for something else. A simple moment escalating into something dangerous. He forced himself to keep moving, refusing to let paranoia take hold. But Mark had already made up his mind. He wasn't letting Jordan out of his sight. Jordan veered onto a different street, hoping the car would keep going. It didn't. Instead, beep. A sharp, piercing siren cut through the silence. Red and blue lights flashed. Jordan stopped mid-stride, his pulse spiking. Turning around, he found Officer Reynolds stepping out of the car, one hand casually resting near his utility belt. "Where are you headed?" Mark asked, his voice firm. Jordan exhaled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Just jogging, officer." "Something wrong?" Mark's gaze flicked over him, scrutinizing every inch like he was solving a puzzle. "Jogging, huh? Haven't seen you around here before." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "Didn't realize I needed clearance to run." Mark ignored the response. "Where do you live?" Jordan kept his tone even. "A few blocks from here." Mark tilted his head. "Few blocks? What's the exact address?" Jordan's jaw tightened. He knew where this was headed. "I don't have to tell you that." Mark took a step closer. "Strange, because I've seen you looping these houses. You've been checking them out." Jordan let out a humorless chuckle. "Checking them out? You think I'm casing the place?" Mark folded his arms. "You fit the profile of someone we got a call about." Jordan felt his patience slipping. "Oh, let me guess. I matched the vague description of some suspicious guy. Happens a lot." Mark smirked. "If you have nothing to hide, why are you being so defensive?" Jordan inhaled sharply, keeping himself calm. "Because you stopped me for no reason." Mark's expression hardened. "All right, turn around. I need to check for weapons." Jordan took a step back, his frustration reaching its limit. He reached into his pocket, not for a weapon, but for something else entirely. His badge. The one that read, Internal Affairs Division, Senior Investigator. Jordan let out a slow breath, his expression unreadable. He had dealt with officers like this before, cops who thought they could intimidate people for no reason. But Mark Reynolds had just picked the worst possible target. "I said turn around," Mark repeated, reaching for his handcuffs. His voice had a sharp edge, a hint of excitement behind it. Jordan didn't budge. "You don't have the right to detain me." Mark scoffed. "Oh, I get it. You think you can talk your way out of this?" Jordan held up the badge, letting the sun catch its polished surface. Mark's smirk faltered. His eyes darted to the badge, then back to Jordan. His grip on the cuffs loosened. Jordan's voice was calm, but firm. "I think we need to have a conversation." Mark swallowed hard. You're with Internal Affairs?" Jordan took a slow step forward, his stare unwavering. "That a problem, Officer Reynolds?" Mark's confidence wavered, panic flickering in his expression. IA had the power to make or break careers, and right now, he had just stepped into the worst situation possible. Jordan tilted his head. "You don't look so sure anymore." Mark didn't answer. He just stood there, silent, as the weight of his mistake settled in. "And now," Officer Mark Reynolds had just made the worst mistake of his career. He had tried to arrest the wrong man. Reynolds took a shaky step back, his face drained of color. Sir, this isn't what it looks like. I was just... Jordan Ellis folded his arms across his chest, his expression unreadable. Go ahead. I'd love to hear how you explain this one. Reynolds let out a nervous chuckle, but it barely masked his growing panic. It was a misunderstanding, he blurted. I thought you were someone else. Jordan arched an eyebrow. Someone else? Reynolds swallowed. Why, you know how it is, sir. We get calls all the time about suspicious activity in the neighborhood. I was just following protocol. Jordan let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. So it's protocol now to stalk someone for blocks? To harass them for jogging? To demand their home address like they don't belong? Reynolds raised both hands in defense. Look, let's not blow this out of proportion. I was just doing my job. Jordan's expression darkened. Your job? Your job is to protect and serve. Instead, you profiled me. You tried to detain me without cause. And now that you know who I am, you want to pretend it never happened? Reynolds had no response. Jordan pulled out his phone. I'm calling this in. Reynolds' eyes widened in alarm. Wait, no, let's talk about this. Jordan ignored him. Within minutes, 3 patrol cars arrived, tires crunching against the pavement as they came to a stop. Officers stepped out, their faces shifting from confusion to realization as they took in the scene. The flashing red and blue lights bathed the quiet street in an eerie glow. Jordan barely needed to explain. This officer stopped me without cause, Jordan stated plainly. He followed me, questioned me, and attempted an unlawful detainment. That's racial profiling. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Some of them had heard things about Reynolds before. The stops he made, the complaints that never went anywhere. The way he always seemed to target people who didn't fit the neighborhood. But no one had ever caught him like this. A tall female officer with sharp eyes stepped forward. Is this true? Reynolds shook his head so quickly it looked desperate. It was a misunderstanding. I was just trying to be cautious. Jordan remained unmoved. And now, I'm doing my job. He reached for the same handcuffs Reynolds had nearly used on him. Turn around. Reynolds hesitated, his face frozen in disbelief. But with his fellow officers standing right there, he had no choice. Slowly he turned. Click. The cold steel locked around his wrists, the finality of it sending a ripple of tension through the gathered officers. Reynolds let out a shaky breath. You can't do this. It was a mistake. Jordan leaned in just slightly, lowering his voice. And that's the problem. You don't think about your actions until it's too late. Reynolds' colleagues shook their heads, some looking embarrassed, others as if they had seen this coming for a long time. We'll take it from here, one of them muttered. As Reynolds was escorted to the back of a squad car, Jordan inhaled deeply, letting the morning air settle his nerves. He had spent years working to remove officers like Reynolds from the force. And yet every time, it felt like a battle that never ended. Because for every Mark Reynolds who got caught, there were others who didn't. But today, justice had won. Days later, Reynolds found himself sitting in a stiff chair inside an internal affairs hearing room. His hands were clasped together, trembling slightly. He had spent years walking through this building, but always on the other side of the table. This time, he was the one under investigation. The room was eerily quiet, save for the shuffling of documents. A panel of officials sat at the front, their faces blank as they reviewed his case file. Jordan sat at the center. He had read every page, every complaint. The deeper he dug, the worse it became. Unlawful stops, excessive questioning, a clear pattern of racial profiling, complaints dismissed or buried, lack of evidence, officers' word against the civilians. No violation of policy. But this time, the evidence was undeniable. Jordan cleared his throat and met Reynolds' gaze. Officer Reynolds, he began, voice calm but unwavering. Your record speaks for itself. You have a pattern of misconduct, bias, and abuse of power. Reynolds opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His usual arrogance had vanished. Jordan continued. This department has no place for officers like you. Silence filled the room. Then, one of the officials nodded, signing off on the final report. Just like that, it was over. Reynolds sat motionless as the reality sank in. His career, his badge, his authority, gone. Jordan rose from his seat, straightening his suit jacket. As he walked past Reynolds, he paused just long enough to murmur, "Actions have consequences." Then, without another word, he left the room. Outside, the sun had fully risen, casting warm light over the city. A new day, a better one. And today, justice had been served.